Yeah, so because last time we were talking about the Epstein case, the corruption of the US government, and toward the end of it, you were talking, you brought up the Borsillai case, and I cut you
Yeah.
unintentionally. But anyway, so I do want to know what the British media reported about this case. It is an old case, but I am still curious. There must be a lot of interest in Britain. It involves a British businessman, Neil Haywood, right? So how did the British media report about this matter?
Right. The British media avoided very much getting into the details of the case at
Hmm.
all. The way they reported it, and I remember this very, very well, is as a power struggle
Okay.
within China.
Mhm.
Supposedly, Bo Xilai was leading a Maoist faction against Xi Jinping
Okay.
and was trying to win out against Xi Jinping. So there were references to the fact that Bo Xilai had a connection with this British businessman, as he rightly said, and connections with Britain, and that his wife, who comes across as a rather sinister
Hmm.
individual for some of the reporting, that she had even more extensive connections with
Hmm.
people in Britain and did seem to be involved in quite a lot of corruption. But they sort of downplayed that. They were
Okay.
basically implying that this is how top Chinese leaders usually behave, that there's
Mhm.
nothing unusual in any of the
Mhm.
extraordinary things that Bo Xilai and his wife were up to. And that, in fact, what had happened was that they'd fallen foul of the rise of Xi Jinping, who was on his way to become China's paramount leader.
Mhm.
Now, of course, I was not as involved in Chinese affairs at that time as I am
Mhm.
today, because we're talking about an event that took place, well, quite a long time ago now. But I remember reading all of this. And I said to myself, this is absolute nonsense. I could tell immediately that the British commentary was completely wrong. And it was clear to me that this was a man, a very ambitious man,
Mhm.
who had gone completely off the rails, and maybe he was led into it by his wife, who knows, but he'd gone completely off the rails and had become deeply corrupt and implicated in terrible things, including murder.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that inevitably, and when the Chinese authorities found out about it, he would be called to account for what he did.
Mm.
And that, of course, is exactly what happened. So it seemed to me there is a classic example of the way the Western media persistently, and the British media in this particular case, persistently misreads events in other countries to fit its own theories
Mhm.
about the way those countries are run. The Western aspect of the scandal, the fact that Boursilai and his wife were heavily implicated in corrupt practices in Britain. And can I just say, if you know anything about London and the city of London and how it functions, you would know that it's completely unsurprising that, there was this British angle to it. Um, anyway, that was, yeah, but you were asking me about the media. That
Mhm.
was heavily downplayed.
Well, I think there's some truth to it. It is a power struggle. But what they missed, I think the British media missed, is it's not as much as Bo Xilai and Xi Jinping are on equal fighting terms that they were trying to get to top. At that time, I think Xi Jinping already pretty much secured his position. People don't people don't understand how the Chinese Communist Party of China works. You do need
Yeah,
votes. These people are actually voted within the party, and
yeah,
which have yeah
yeah,
close to 100 million members. So, which is a lot of members, and you
yeah,
go through different stages, and that's how you get
yeah,
there. It's not like it's now, the reason people think that they are on equal terms is they both are regarded as, we call them princelings. Okay, they come from
yeah, yeah,
established families. But I think that Bosilai had a very bad reputation. On the one hand, he was the mayor of Dalian and later Chongqing. So he achieved something in those cities. Some people in those
yeah,
cities do like him because he supposedly cracked down on corruption. but he himself is extremely corrupted, and he also very coercive and sometimes using very, very questionable means to do
Yeah.
things like killing people. I mean, murder people. There has been scandals of that, that by his direction, people got murdered for whatever reason, people who defined him or disagree with him, stuff like that. So he's like a horrible figure in that sense. And of course, the party wouldn't want somebody like that to
No.
lead the country. I think
Yeah.
his main problem is himself, that he just has so many questionable dealings in the past. And of course, corruption is a big part of it. And Neil Haywood is involved in that because he was helping the family. He's almost like the family handler
Yeah.
for different countries, and in particular Britain, right?
Yeah.
Dealing with the British business and the political leaders, kind of the figure, right? And then,
Well, absolutely. I mean, can I make a few quick comments about this because I've seen this happen. I was recently in Georgia, in Tbilisi, and I saw how it worked there, and of course I know Moscow and what happened there too. So let's use Moscow as an example because I think there are similarities and some parallels. Now, for the first 10 years of the 21st century, when in fact for the 90s and in the early 2000s and in the 2000s, Moscow politics was dominated by a man called Yuri Lushkov.
mhm,
Yuri Lushkov was the mayor of Moscow. And at one time, rather like Bosilai, he was
mhm,
popular because he did seem to be getting things done. I mean, buildings were getting cleaned and the rubbish was getting collected and things of that kind. But what he was actually doing, and I think this is exactly what Bosilai was doing, is that he was concentrating on the corruption. He was bringing the corruption under his personal control.
mhm,
So that can lead to an impression that things are getting better when in fact in reality what you have is a boss type person who is taking sort of control. I saw that in Moscow. I saw that, by the way, Tbilisi, the city of Tbilisi, which is the capital of Georgia, has been through exactly the same process. Now, in the case of Lushkov, he was eventually removed because his corruption had become so grotesque that eventually uh, um, they removed him. They didn't prosecute him because this is Russia, and there was problems, and he still had a lot of power. And his wife, who played a similar role to Bosilai's wife, came to London. Notice the London connection. And she's still here and she controls billions of dollars. And she's a major figure, by the way, in organizing and spreading the anti Russian propaganda that you get in Britain. So, so the Russians failed to clean up in the same way. But I think that this is basically what you're describing with
mhm.
Bosilai.
Yeah,
He was effective,
yeah,
but effective first and foremost in concentrating the corruption in himself. And that can, as I said, seem like it's achieving something. Now, the key thing to understand about we were talking about the Communist Party of China
mhm,
um, in a few programs, is I think this is completely impossible to sustain for any length of time within the Communist Party structures. Now, a friend of mine who is Russian
mhm,
was for a time based in Shanghai. In fact, he was the director of one of the Russian state banks in Shanghai. Now, he, I should say, is a man of staunch communist convictions, not incompatible to be a banker and that in Russia. But anyway, he was a man of staunch communist convictions. He was a high flyer in the Komsomol, the Communist Youth League.
mhm,
He told me something very interesting, comparing the Communist Party in China and the Communist Party in Russia, which I should have mentioned in our previous program, which is that relative to the size of the population in China,
mhm,
the Communist Party of China is very small.
mhm,
I mean, it may seem like it's very big, 90 million people or whatever, but you're talking about a country of 1.4 billion
Mhm.
people.
Yeah.
Whereas in Russia, starting from the time of Nikita Khrushchev in the 50s, there had been a policy to expand the party membership
Mhm.
as much as possible through as big a proportion of the population as possible. And he said to me that this fostered corruption and
Mhm.
diluted the party because far too many people who joined the party were not really committed to it.
Mhm.
And he said the Chinese in China had taken a completely different approach. So that the people that he was coming up against, people who were members of the Communist Party, they were relatively few
Mhm.
and they were committed to the party and to its membership and basically to its program.
Yeah.
So he actually, and this is, I think, we didn't actually talk about Borsilai, but he
Mhm.
told me that he didn't think that the kind of boss politics that established themselves in Russia would
Mhm.
be possible in China in the same way for that reason, because the party structures were under much tighter
Mhm.
control and much more disciplined, and that the party in China retained its inner coherence. Now, this is from someone, as I said, who has deep communist convictions. I mean, he was a genuine, sincere communist, both in Soviet times and still today. We're still friends. So you get the difference. So I don't think he could have survived. I don't think there's any possibility that he would have become paramount leader of China. That was inconceivable, actually. The extraordinary thing was that he was able to establish himself where he was at all and rise to the level of the Politburo, though not, I believe, to the Standing Committee.
Mhm.
And I again, and I'm not talking about this Russian friend.
Mhm.
He said that in the 1980s, at the time when China opened up and there were the big reforms, because there was a lot of inflation at that time as a result of the adjustments, there had been some temptation for corruption,
Mhm.
which had affected some of the cadres. But he also said to me, and he was the man who taught me about Chen Yun, of whom he was a great admirer,
Uh-huh.
by the way. He is a great admirer.
Yeah.
That Chen Yun at that time was very, very opposed to
Mhm.
corruption.
Yeah.
And that managed to bring the whole situation to a great extent under control. And the Chen Yun lived a very austere lifestyle, which was an example to the rest of the Chinese leaders. And he said to me, this man, who is a friend of mine, said to me that he felt that Xi Jinping was to a great extent a disciple of Chen Yun. You might be completely wrong about the last point, but anyway, that was what he said. That he was very influenced by the example of Chen Yun, and that just as Chen Yun brought corruption under control, then basically purifying the party, that Xi Jinping would be continuing in that tradition. Now, we had that conversation, I should say, in 2017 when I
Mhm.
was in China. So not very long after
Mhm.
um, Xi Jinping became
Mhm.
China's president.
Well, I think Bosila in a way almost like a mafia leader, a little bit
Yeah,
of that kind of style, right? So that
yeah,
that can never work in the
no,
Communist Party
no,
of China. So,
no,
but I don't
no.
think the British media realize that. And it's
The British media absolutely would not realize that.
and
They would see Bosilai as typical, not as the exception. Whereas to my Russian friend,
Mhm.
with his standards of comparison being the Soviet Union, where
Mhm.
at the end the party was very affected by corruption.
Yeah.
He said to me that in China, I mean, this is not the way it works.
Mhm.
Corruption in the party at that level is just impossible
Yeah.
because the people are too carefully selected for that to happen.